Hello, my name is Galina Kurdina. I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I am a victim of psychotronic mind control influence. I filed a complaint against psychologist Dr. Berry with the College of Psychologists of Ontario. It was dismissed, and after that I requested for a review and filed this request with the Health Professions Appeal and Review Board in Ontario. I don't want to read you all the documents, it will take a lot of time. I would like to read and comment on my request for the review. In my request, I inform that I am a victim of psychotronic mind control weapons. I have experienced the following symptoms since January 2006. Trauma of left temple, it was like a stroke of lightning. After the trauma, I was unable to read and understand meaning of words nor speak properly. Feeling of living in an unreal world as if I take drugs. Pressure from above on the crown of the head, which brings me to heavy hypnotic twilight state. Constant manipulations in the above state 24 hours, 7 days per week, except time when I sleep. As if I am a biorobot. Involuntary movements, forced speech, involuntary change of facial expressions, tone and pitch of voice, artificial change of emotions, desires, artificial laughter and tears, deletion of memory. I cannot remember what I did or was going to do 2-3 seconds ago. Debilitation of mental acuity, inability to concentrate, disruption of ability to think rationally and independently, loss of memory, knowledge. I receive non-stop stream of words and very clear visual images. I experience blurred vision, loss of coordination of movements, dizziness. I experience sleep deprivation or uncontrollable sleep. I experience heart attacks, cramps, seizures and spasms in muscles of legs, excruciating artificial tooth pain, intense loud electronic sounding noise, potentially from auditory stimulation by radiofrequency pulse modulation or advanced cochlear hearing aid brain stem technology. Psychotronic weapons exist and induce exactly the same symptoms as I experience. I informed the board about a list of books and articles from Medline Library that prove that body and mind control exists. In March 2009, I called Dr. Berry and said to him that I was a victim of mind control influence and needed a critique of reports of psychiatrists, Drs. Dief and Gratzer. Dr. Berry answered that he had no clinical experience or professional training in the assessment or treatment of persons who have been subject to manipulation via psychotronic devices. Dr. Berry told me that he could prepare the critique only after evaluation of my psychological health. It was Dr. Berry who talked me into this psychological evaluation. This evaluation was his initiative. I didn't seek an opinion of Dr. Berry in regard to whether I was suffering from any psychiatric disorder. I didn't want it, I didn't need it, and I didn't have money for it. I had to borrow $1,500 for this examination. I have a document, a client information form that proves that I came to him just for the critique, nothing more. And if I find it, sorry, you will see this client form. Just a moment. Sorry, my computer works very slowly. Yes, as you can see, I came to Dr. Berry in order to cancel psychiatric diagnosis. I didn't need and I didn't ask to do any psychological assessments. It was Dr. Berry who talked me into this assessment. Dr. Berry persuaded me that he was able to examine my mental health and critique reports of Doctors Dief and Gratzer, despite the fact that he has no clinical experience or professional training in the assessment or treatment of persons who have been subject to manipulation via directed energy or psychotronic devices. I didn't know that members of the College of Psychologists of Ontario was strictly prohibited from practicing outside area of their expertise, and Dr. Berry didn't inform me about this rule of the college. That was why I retained Dr. Berry and visited him at 7045 Edwards Blvd, Suite 305, Mississauga, Ontario, in March 2009. Dr. Berry misled me and convinced that he was able to critique reports of Doctors Dief and Gratzer, but eventually I didn't get any critique. I got just the assessment and paid $1,500 for it. In my opinion, he was not going to write any critiques. He wanted to examine me for money outside area of his expertise. I apologize. I experience forced speech and cannot read and talk properly. I brought a lot of articles regarding psychotronic weapons, transcript of enormous life-threatening radio frequency measurements at my place, declassified documents from the Department of the Army of the United States of America, a letter of Representative Jim Guest to members of the legislature, a letter from an attorney John Wilson, 2 letters from Dr. Hall, letter dated March 11, 2009, with expert opinion from a research psychologist, Dr. Cynthia Spanier, who had a specialty in the treatment of victims of psychotronic mind control weapons. This expert opinion states that I showed no evidence of any kind of psychotic disorder, including no signs of delusional disorder, and all my physical and psychological symptoms were the direct result of psychotronic attacks to my person. Before the examination, I provided Dr. Berry with statements of claim against Drs. Dief and Gratzer with symptoms that I experienced in 2006-2008 in writing. All this information didn't help Dr. Berry, and he stated in his report that he wasn't a specialist in the area of assessment and treatment of mind control victims. I received a copy of his report on the 26th of March 2009. I'm sure that when a psychologist practices outside area of his expertise, he cannot make any conclusions. Despite all my requests to Dr. Berry to be honest and state that he didn't know how to differentiate psychotronic effects and psychiatric diseases, and was not able to make any conclusion and form any diagnosis, his handwriting notes on the 18th of March 2009 and the 26th of March 2009 prove it. His report states that clinically I present with a delusional disorder. Sorry. I said to Dr. Berry that the report contained a lot of factual mistakes, and I disagreed with his diagnosis. I considered it wrong and offered recommendation to take psychiatric medication as dangerous. It is beyond my imagination when a doctor prescribes to a healthy person drugs for a psychiatric disease. Dr. Berry corrected some mistakes on the 26th of March 2009, but left many of them in the report. I sent a statement of disagreement with description of factual mistakes in the report to Dr. Berry. On the 26th of March 2009, I asked Dr. Berry how he differentiated symptoms caused by delusional disorder and induced by psychotronic mind control weapon attacks. Dr. Berry answered that he formed the psychiatric diagnosis just because, in his opinion, psychiatric diseases happen to people more often than psychotronic attacks. Judgment of Dr. Berry is similar to judgment of a doctor who says to a patient with high temperature and cough that he has flu, not pneumonia, just because flu happens to people more often than pneumonia. Dr. Berry invented the criterion, but he doesn't have any proofs or statistics in support of it. I said to Dr. Berry that if it was his only criterion how to differentiate delusional disorder and psychotronic attacks, his judgment was negligent, and I was going to sue him for negligence, breach of duty, and negligent infliction of emotional distress. Sorry for my forced speech. When Dr. Berry is forming a diagnosis for a patient who is victim of psychotronic mind control effects, he must take into consideration these effects. He must have clear criteria how to differentiate symptoms of psychotic illness and psychotronic attacks, which are markedly similar but not the same 100%, and it is possible to separate them. If he doesn't have such criteria and cannot differentiate psychotic illness and psychotronic attacks, he labels mentally healthy people under psychotronic effects with wrong psychiatric diagnosis. When he is labeling mentally healthy people with wrong psychiatric diagnosis, he falls below standards of care. If he doesn't have criteria how to differentiate symptoms of psychotic illness and psychotronic attacks, he shall not make psychiatric diagnosis for persons who have been subject to manipulation via mind control devices. My symptoms do not meet definition of delusional disorder in DSM-4. DSM-4-TR states a diagnosis delusional disorder is not given if the individual has ever had a symptom presentation that met criterion A for schizophrenia. Auditory or visual hallucinations, if present, are not prominent. DSM-4-TR states that characteristic symptoms of criterion A for schizophrenia are 2 or more for the following, each present for a significant portion of time during a 1-month period or less if successfully treated. Delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, for example, frequent derailment or incoherence, grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, negative symptoms. Only one criterion A symptoms is required if delusions are bizarre or hallucinations consist of a voice keeping up a running commentary on the person's behavior or thoughts, or 2 or more voices conversing with each other. The diagnosis of delusional disorder in DSM-4-TR demands to conduct a retrospective assessment of symptoms that patients experienced in the past. I told Dr. Berry that I experienced constant auditory and visual hallucinations and provided him with 2 statements of claim against Drs. Dief and Gratzer before the examination in March 2009. The statement of claim against Dr. Dief states, sorry for speech, one more time. The statement of claim against Dr. Dief states, plaintiff has been constantly, severely attacked by directed energy weapons since January 2006, but there are indications that she had been attacked much earlier on. Plaintiff has experienced constant symptoms, receiving very clear visual images and sounds, voices to skull technology. The statement of claim against Dr. Gratzer states, plaintiff cites that she has been attacked openly by electromagnetic energy and psychotronic weapon using sophisticated electronic devices since January 2006. Plaintiff testifies that she experienced exactly the same symptoms that psychotronic weapon induces in people since January 2006, triggered actions and deletion memory of them later. Plaintiff experiences a pressure on her crown from above, especially on the left side of her head. This pressure brings her in a grave, hypnotic twilight state. She experiences pressure on the forehead and temples, which makes impossible to concentrate and think. This pressure debilitates mental abilities. She gets a non-stop stream of words, commands, impulses, pictures. It proves that I informed Dr. Berry that I experienced constant, prominent and significant visual images and sounds that Dr. Berry interpreted as visual and auditory hallucinations. It proves that my symptoms that Dr. Berry interpreted as delusions, my belief that I am influenced by a psychotronic weapon, and hallucinations, non-stop stream of words, commands, pictures, met criterion A for schizophrenia 100%. It proves that Dr. Berry formed a wrong diagnosis delusional disorder, since DSM-4TR states that diagnosis delusional disorder is not given if the individual has ever had a symptom presentation that met criterion A for schizophrenia. Dr. Berry claims the delusional disorder may present with insignificant hallucinations that are related to or form the content of the delusion. In my case, these hallucinations, non-stop stream of words and pictures, 24 hours, 7 days per week except time when I sleep, are prominent, and the voices do not constitute part of my delusional belief that I am subject to a psychotronic mind control. I reported to Dr. Berry that voices were actually a running commentary on my behavior and conversations with me. Dr. Berry admits in his 8th answer in the first set of follow-up answers dated the 10th of January 2012 that he wrote in his handwriting notes on the 18th of March 2009 that I did not hear voices that were commands, but I heard voices that exchanged information with me and discussed what was happening to me. I was assessed by doctors Dief and Gratzer in June 2006. They didn't render a diagnosis of schizophrenia because I have never ever had this disease. My claim that I satisfied in the past and satisfy in the present criterion A for schizophrenia does not constitute self-diagnosis of schizophrenia. It constitutes that I am a victim of psychotronic, mind-controlled, directed energy, weapons, and diagnosis delusional disorder of Dr. Berry is wrong. Historical opinions of Drs. Dief, delusional disorder, and Gratzer, psychosis, are as wrong and negligent as the opinion of Dr. Berry. My lawsuit against psychiatrist Dr. Dief and the lawsuit against psychiatrist Dr. Gratzer were dismissed in 2009 because I didn't have an expert opinion from a psychiatrist in Ontario. I was not possible to get it since all psychiatrists cancelled their appointments with me as soon as they heard my symptoms and purpose of the examination. And eventually my family doctor Maged Ibrahim refused to refer me to psychiatrists anymore because these referrals took too much of his time. I provided the Superior Court of Justice with expert opinions from psychologists Dr. Spanier, Steiner, Joyce Myers in the United States of America that I didn't have a psychotic or delusional disorder or any other mental illness and was victimized by psychotronic mind control weapons, that psychiatrists Drs. Dief and Gratzer were negligent, and I developed post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of mind control attacks and wrong psychiatric diagnosis. I tried to persuade justices in the Superior Court of Justice that diagnostic system in psychiatry and psychology is the same, and psychologists can opine on applicable standards of diagnosis of psychiatrists in Ontario, but unfortunately my actions against Drs. Dief and Gratzer were dismissed. Dr. Berry cannot use medical diagnosis of Drs. Dief and Gratzer since they are psychiatrists and cannot opine on work of psychologist Dr. Berry. Negligence of Dr. Berry. I strongly believe that Dr. Berry made the diagnosis delusional disorder in bad faith, with such serious carelessness and recklessness as to be inexplicable and incomprehensible. Diagnosis delusional disorder of Dr. Berry is wrong. because I have a symptom presentation that doesn't meet definition of delusional disorder in DSM-4. I provided Dr. Berry with 2 statements of claim against Dr. Dief and Dr. Gratzer before the examination in March 2009. My symptoms in these statements meet criterion A for schizophrenia 100%. Furthermore, Dr. Berry failed to note a history of the reported symptoms from January 2006 to August 2008 in his report. And he had to do it. He had to do a retrospective assessment and note a history of the reported symptoms. Second, Dr. Berry states in his answers on questions on written examination for discovery that patient's self-report is helpful information but not sufficient in and of itself to render a retrospective assessment. He states that a clinician is not able to conduct a retrospective assessment without viable point-in-time data, for example, video recording and the like. He states that doctor's assessment at the time in the past when the patient was experiencing symptoms is necessary in order to do a retrospective assessment and form current psychiatric diagnosis. He admits that this extremely unusual for any psychologist statements are not supported by DSM-4 TR. It proves that Dr. Berry invented these ideas and many other ideas as well, and confessed that they were not true after I demanded to refer me to paragraphs in DSM-4 that prove these unusual statements. Third point, I strongly believe that Dr. Berry is a negligent doctor since he insisted on my psychological evaluation and provided services. He made diagnosis outside his area of competence. According to the registration regulation 53398, section 10.2.1 of the College of Psychologists of Ontario, the member shall practice the profession only within those areas of the member's competency that are authorized by the college or under the supervision of a member who has competence in those areas. There is an area of assessment and treatment of victims of psychotronic mind control weapons in psychology, and there are 2 psychologists in Ontario who claim that they work in this area, Dr. Pacheco and Dr. Marcia Wiener. I called them and they confirmed it. First, I called Ontario Psychological Association, and this association referred me to these 2 doctors as specialists in field of assessment and treatment of mind control victims. After that, I called Drs. Pacheco and Wiener, and they confirmed it. Dr. Berry had no clinical experience or professional training in the assessment or treatment of persons who had been subject to manipulation via directed energy or psychotronic devices. See caveat in his report. I can show you, just a moment, it will take a little bit of time. I can show you report of Dr. Berry, but trust me, there is such a paragraph caveat, and yes, and it reads: the undersigned has no clinical experience or professional training in the assessment or treatment of persons who have been subject to manipulation via directed energy or psychotronic devices. Dr. Berry had a lot of experience with sex offenders perpetrators, but none with victims of mind control effects. I can show you his curriculum vitae, and you will see that just a moment. Here it is. Yes. that most of his experience was work with sex perpetrators. Okay. The fourth point, I requested Dr. Berry to be honest and state the truth in his report, that he didn't know how to differentiate psychotronic effects and psychiatric diseases, and he was not able to make any conclusion and form any diagnosis. His handwriting notes on the 18th of March 2009 and on the 26th of March 2009 prove it. Despite all my requests, he made the diagnosis delusional disorder. If Dr. Berry doesn't know how to differentiate symptoms of psychiatric illness and psychotronic mind control effects, he shall not form psychiatric diagnosis for persons who have been subject to manipulation via mind control devices. The fifth point, if Dr. Berry decides to form a diagnosis for a person who is a victim of mind control effects, he must attempt to differentiate between psychiatric disorders and psychotronic attacks. If he doesn't attempt to differentiate psychotic illness and psychotronic attacks, he labels mentally healthy people victims of psychotronic attacks with wrong psychiatric diagnosis. When he is labeling mentally healthy people victims of psychotronic attacks with wrong psychiatric diagnosis, he falls below standards of care. Takes a lot of time. Okay, let's continue. And in his answer 17 and the first set of follow-up answers on the written examination for discovery, he admits that he didn't attempt to differentiate between psychiatric disorders and psychotronic attacks. The sixth point, I strongly believe that Dr. Berry is a negligent doctor, since during the assessment in March 2009, he refused to take into account the life-threatening measurements of radio frequency electromagnetic field at my place that proved influence of psychotronic weapons. The seventh point, I strongly believe that Dr. Berry is a negligent doctor, since during the assessment in March 2009, he refused to take into account an expert opinion of Dr. Spanier, research psychologist, that my physical and psychological symptoms are the direct result of mind control attacks to my person, and I didn't show any evidence of any psychotic disorder. Psychologically, these attacks cause a severe stress reaction that results in physical, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Spanier is sure that I am free of indicia that would be consistent with psychiatric disorder of delusional reference, psychosis, and mood disorder. Dr. Berry refused to take into consideration opinion of Dr. Hall that I may be a victim of satellite surveillance and may have some type of chips in my system as well. Damage, post-traumatic stress disorder, continuous torture from psychological trauma because of stigma of being labeled as a mentally disabled person. Ostracism by surrounding people as a result of the psychiatric diagnosis. Job deprivation, deprivation of profession, financial damage because of the false psychiatric diagnosis. Such damning diagnosis as permanent psychotic illness means permanent disability and doesn't leave any chance to find a job. I receive anterior disability income support because of this false psychiatric diagnosis. Loss of trust, love, support, and intimacy from family. I and my son have been living separately since 2007, who didn't want to explore actual reasons of my symptoms. officially labeled me with the psychiatric diagnosis, left me open to further experimentation without possibility for my family to perceive an assault as the true cause of my incapacitation. Deprivation of rights because of this psychiatric diagnosis. RCMP and police deprive me of legal right of investigation of crime, defense, proper legislation, and proper interpretation of legislation, using this wrong diagnosis as a rule not to start investigation when I report to them about psychotronic weapons attacks. I wasn't admitted to the United States of America on the 4th of September 2012 because officers of the United States Homeland Security forced me to disclose wrong psychiatric diagnosis and used them in order to deny my entry to the United States of America. 6. The wrong diagnosis threatens my life and safety. The Toronto police and RCMP refer me to doctors and have very hot desire to put me in psychiatric hospitals against my will every time when I report to them about psychotronic mind control influence upon me. For example, I called 911 on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of June 2013, since I experienced mind control attacks 24 hours, 7 days per week. Felt bad and needed urgent help. So, the Toronto police came to my place, wanted to put me in a psychiatric hospital, but failed and arrested me because of these 3 calls for immediate help. And the last point, psychological loss of faith in healthcare professionals, requiring now rehabilitation in regards to that trust. Reports with expert opinions from the United States of America. Dr. Stenninger, a toxicologist, wrote in her expert report dated June 14, 2009. In summation, Miss Galina Kurdina has been experiencing the effects of specific electromagnetic and radio frequency fields being targeted to her home since January 2006. These frequency ranges react with specific nano and advanced electronics materials that are being created in universities and being utilized commercially by industry, medicine, pharmaceutical, government, and military for monitoring, communications, and sensory applications. Dr. Stenninger wrote in the addendum to the report dated October 24, 2009, Ms. Kurdina previous history of directed energy exposure not only causes a roller coaster effect of cholinesterase levels, but will react with advanced nanomaterials that are used as radiofrequency chips to send signals to the body. I sent Dr. Berry email letters with records of Dr. Stenninger in June, October, and November 2009. I wrote in an email letter dated the 24th of November 2009. I sent you an affidavit of Dr. Stenninger, her 2 reports, and addendum to the 2nd report. Please take a look at them, especially at the 1st report and addendum to the 2nd report. They prove that I am a victim of specific electromagnetic attacks and have nanomaterials in my system that are used as chips to send signals to my body. The reports of Dr. Stenninger prove that my beliefs are not delusional, they are realistic. I called Dr. Berry after that and asked him to read email letters with reports of Dr. Stenninger, but Dr. Berry answered that he didn't want to open these letters. Drs. Spanier, Steiner, and Joyce Myers were provided with diagnoses from 2 psychiatrists and the psychologist Dr. Berry. In their letters and reports they use words physician and psychiatrist, but these words physician and psychiatrist are relevant and mean Dr. Berry as well. Dr. Spanier, research psychologist, duly qualified expert in the field of psychology and treatment of victims of psychotronic weapons, wrote in her expert opinion dated March 11, 2009, "I have a specialty in the treatment of victims of directed energy weapons." After review of the records of Galina Kurdina, it is clear that her physical and psychological symptoms are the direct result of directed energy weapons attacks to her persons. Psychologically, these attacks cause a severe stress reaction that results in physical, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral symptoms. Like many, if not all, of the directed energy weapon victims I have seen, Galina shows no evidence of any kind of psychotic disorder, including no signs of delusional disorder. All of her psychological and stress symptoms can be accounted for by the directed energy weapons attacks. Dr. Spanier wrote in her expert report dated May 26, 2009, Miss Kurdina was free of indicia that would be consistent with a psychiatric disorder of delusional reference. Miss Kurdina is an intelligent, capable woman who presents as free of a psychiatric disorder. Clinically, Miss Kurdina presents with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. These symptoms appear to be the result of the directed energy weapons attacks, she reports. Galina is free of any indication of psychosis and mood disorder. Dr. Spanier is sure that the diagnosis of Dr. Berry delusional disorder is wrong. Dr. June Steiner, duly qualified expert in the field of hypnotherapy and treatment of victims of psychotronic weapons, wrote in her expert opinion dated May 13, 2009, "I specialize in treating trauma victims, including those victimized by directed energy weapons, electromagnetic weapons, and or psychotronic weapons. My work with patients who are victims of directed energy weapons show identical symptoms as those Galina Kurdina reports experiencing. I have experienced success in working with those attacked by directed energy weapons and have no reason to think that Galina cannot be treated successfully. I attest that her physical and psychological symptoms are clearly a direct result of directed energy attacks upon her person. Attacks by directed energy weapon cause the reported severe stress reaction that shows itself as a serious post-traumatic stress disorder. The psychological effects of this type of a severe stress reaction often create the physical, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral symptoms as reported by Galina Kurdina. I have seen no evidence of psychotic or delusional disorder or any other mental illness. Dr. June Steiner is sure that Dr. Berry has formed the wrong diagnosis, delusional disorder. Dr. June Steiner, duly qualified expert in the field of hypnotherapy and treatment of victims of psychotronic weapons, wrote in her expert opinion dated June 6, 2009, Galina Kurdina has concrete evidence that psychotronic weapons exist and she experiences the symptoms of such weapons. Yet no one is looking into this evidence as a possibility for her symptoms and instead are diagnosing her as psychotic. It is distressing when a physician is unwilling to look at the authentic evidence available that might explain the symptoms and prevent labeling the patient with a serious mental condition. The psychiatrist should be instructed to do the necessary investigation of said information and report back why he is not willing to accept the possibility of a new diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder due to psychotronic weaponry. Dr. June Steiner actually shows that Dr. Berry is negligent because he doesn't want to investigate reported facts, research, and look at the available authentic evidence of psychotronic weapons attacks. Dr. June Steiner, duly qualified expert in the field of hypnotherapy and treatment of victims of psychotronic weapons, wrote in her expert medical opinion dated May 13, 2009. Her symptoms have been complicated by the fact that those treating her are not familiar with directed energy weapon. Therefore, the problems have heightened because she doesn't experience being believed or supported, thereby increasing her stress. Functioning is greatly impacted in most areas of her life, and therefore her work and relationships are very difficult. The impact of not being believed is harmful to her state of well-being. She wrote in her expert opinion dated June 6, 2009, the diagnosis creates serious infringements on her life and therefore must be given only when all other possibilities have been exhausted. The misdiagnosis also prevents the patient from getting the appropriate treatment for the problem. Dr. June Steiner is sure that the misdiagnosis of Dr. Berry increases my stress, impacts most area of my life, is harmful to my state of well-being, creates serious infringements on my life, prevents from getting the appropriate treatment for the problem. Dr. June Steiner is sure that Dr. Berry has caused and contributed to my damage. I have got an affidavit of Dr. June Steiner sworn with a notary on the 23rd of November 2012 for the lawsuit against Dr. Berry, where she put above mentioned statement. I have an affidavit of Melinda Kidder sworn with a notary on the 1st of October 2012. A duly qualified private detector licensed in Missouri State, United States of America, that states that I am a victim of mind control influence. Melinda Kidder has evaluated the qualifications and work of Dr. Stenninger in regard to her work with me. Melinda states that Dr. Stenninger is a properly certified, able to address my concerns in regard to psychotronic weapons, is considered an expert in her field of toxicology, and testified in previous unrelated litigation as an expert witness. Melinda Kidder has no doubt regarding veracity of Dr. Stenninger's conclusions that I am a victim of specific electromagnetic effects and have nanomaterials in my system that send signals to my mind and body. Melinda has evaluated the qualifications of Drs. Steiner, Spanier, and Joyce Myers, and states that all of them are well qualified to make evaluations and determine my psychological status. Melinda Kidder concludes that perpetrators of my implantation have been using and will continue to use this technology to electronically stalk and harass me if the judicial system and law enforcement do not intervene. Legal action against Dr. Berry filed with the Superior Court of Justice. I filed a statement of claim against Dr. Berry with the Superior Court of Justice in Toronto. I have completed examination for discovery by means of questions and answers. Dr. Berry invented ideas or simply intentionally lied in his answers, and I can prove it. I provided Dr. Berry with a set of symptoms mentioned in declassified documents from the Department of the Army of the United States of America as identifying psychotronic weapons. I reported to Dr. Berry about these symptoms verbally and in writing in statements of claim against Drs. Dief and Gratzer. Loss of memory, voices and sounds in my head, involuntary body movements, cramps, seizures, and spasms in muscles, disruption of concentration, high pressure on head from above, blurred vision, loss of coordination of movements, dizziness, giddiness. I asked in the 18th question in questions on written examination, for speech. What psychiatric disease this set of symptoms identifies? Dr. Berry answered that these symptoms could fit a number of different psychiatric disorders, including post-traumatic stress disorder, delusional disorder, and schizophrenia. I asked him to refer me to paragraphs in DSM-4 that prove this idea. He answers in the 43rd answer in the second set of follow-up answers that he cannot do it. It means that he invented his idea that this set of very specific symptoms could meet a number of different psychiatric disorders. Another example, Dr. Berry states in his answer for the first question in the third set of follow-up answers dated the 27th of March 2012 that a clinician is not able to conduct a retrospective assessment without viable point-in-time data, for example, video recording and the like. Dr. Berry states in his answer for the third question in the third set of follow-up answers dated the 27th of March 2012 that patient self-report is helpful information but not sufficient in and of itself to render a historical diagnosis. Dr. Berry states in his answers for the 12th and 13th questions in second set of follow-up answers dated the 8th of February 2012 that patient's report of his/her symptoms in the past is not enough, and doctor's assessment at the time when the patient was experiencing the symptoms is necessary in order to do a retrospective assessment and form a current psychiatric diagnosis. On the 13th of April 2012, Dr. Berry refused to answer the fourth set of follow-up questions. I brought a motion in order to force Dr. Berry to answer 3 absolutely just and proper questions. First question. Dr. Berry states in his answer for the first question in the third set of follow-up answers dated the 27th of March that a clinician is not able to conduct a retrospective assessment without viable point-in-time data, for example, video recording and the like. Could he refer to concrete paragraphs in DSM-4 that prove this statement? If there are no such concrete paragraphs in DSM-4, Dr. Berry must write it in his answer. Second question. Dr. Berry states in his answer for the third question in the third set of follow-up answers dated the 27th of March 2012 that patient self-report is helpful information but not sufficient in and of itself to render a historical diagnosis. Actually, we discuss meeting of criterion A, not diagnosis of schizophrenia. Could he refer to concrete paragraphs in DSM-4 that prove this statement? If there are no such concrete paragraphs in DSM-4, Dr. Berry must write it in his answer. Third question. Dr. Berry states in his answers for the 12th and 13th questions in second set of follow-up answers dated the 8th of February 2012 that without having assessed me during or soon after the time in question from January 2006 to August 2008, especially from September 2007 to December 2007, that without having assessed me during this time, he cannot say whether my symptoms at that time would have satisfied criterion A for schizophrenia. Could he refer to concrete paragraphs in DSM-4 that prove his statement that patient's report of his/her symptoms in the past is not enough, and doctor's assessment at that time in the past when the patient was experiencing the symptoms is necessary in order to form a psychiatric diagnosis of current status? If there are no such concrete paragraphs in DSM-4, Dr. Berry must write it in his answer. Master Glustein ordered in his endorsement made at the motion heard on the 24th of October 2012 that it would be best for the trial court if answers were set out clearly in response to those questions, since prior answers were unclear, contained in parts of other reports, and were not stated to be direct responses to the questions. Master Glustein asked me whether I had any more questions for Dr. Berry, and I answered that I didn't have them. So in addition, Master Glustein ordered that there is to be no further follow-up questions. I received corrected answers with new included sentences from Dr. Berry on the 12th of November 2012. I received the answers that DSM-4 doesn't support all these ideas of Dr. Berry several months after I had asked these questions. That is why I am sure that Dr. Berry and his lawyers used stalling techniques in the litigation process. I filed a complaint with the College of Psychologists of Ontario against Dr. Berry. I provided the Superior Court of Justice with expert opinions of psychologists from the United States of America that I am a victim of mind control effects and do not have any psychotic disorders, but Dr. Berry claims that standards of care for psychologists in the United States of America and Ontario are different and demands an expert opinion from a psychologist in Ontario. I began to call and email psychologists in Ontario in order to get an expert opinion from them. There is an area of assessment and treatment of victims of psychotronic mind control weapons in psychology. And there are two psychologists in Ontario who claim that they work in this area, Dr. Pacheco and Dr. Wiener. Unfortunately, both of them refused to deal with legal issues and prepare a critique of Dr. Berry's report. I started talking to other psychologists, and since they were not specialists in area of assessment and treatment of mind control victims, asked them to critique very limited number of errors in report of Dr. Berry. All of psychologists have refused to do it so far. Most of them answered that it wasn't area of their expertise and they didn't want to deal with legal issues. Tens of psychologists suggested filing a complaint with the College of Psychologists of Ontario, and I filed it on the 19th of February 2013. Prior to lodging my complaint, I telephoned the college and asked if the college's investigation would act as a critique of Dr. Berry's report or evidence in legal action. The college registrars didn't say to me that use of the college decision as the critique of Dr. Berry's report or evidence in legal action would be an abuse of the complaint process. They told me that I could file the complaint, explained that all psychologists in Ontario must provide services within area of their competence, and referred me to the registration regulation 533/98 section 10(2)(1) of the College of Psychologists of Ontario. The member shall practice the profession only within those areas of the member's competency that are authorized by the college or under the supervision of a member who has competence in those areas. Actually, I talked to many people regarding the issue whether the college decision could be used as a critique of Dr. Berry's report or evidence in the civil proceeding, because I am not a lawyer and do not know laws very well. It was answered that Section 36.3 in Regulated Health Professions Act 1991 prohibits me from using a decision made by the college in a civil proceeding, but it doesn't prohibit me from using it to disclose to other psychologists in order to get a critique for the legal action. I asked specialists in the college to refrain from making any new diagnosis for me if they do not have clinical experience or professional training in the assessment of persons who have been subject to manipulation via mind control devices, and requested to give their opinion regarding the following points. First, Dr. Berry insisted on my psychological evaluation and provided services outside area of his competence. He persuaded me that he was able to examine my mental health and critique reports of doctors Dief and Gratzer, despite the fact that he is not a specialist in the field of assessment and treatment of people who are subject to mind control attacks. Second, Dr. Berry formed the diagnosis delusional disorder for me in March 2009. My symptom presentation doesn't meet definition of delusional disorder in DSM-4. I provided Dr. Berry with 2 statements of claim against Dr. Dief and Dr. Gratzer before the examination in March 2009. My symptoms in these statements meet criterion A for schizophrenia 100%. Furthermore, Dr. Berry failed to note a history of the reported symptoms from January 2006 to August 2008 in his report. Third point, Dr. Berry states in his answers to questions on written examination for discovery that patient's self-report is helpful information but not sufficient in and of itself to render a retrospective assessment. He states that a clinician is not able to conduct a retrospective assessment without viable point-in-time data, video recording, and the like. He states that doctor's assessment at the time in the past, when the patient was experiencing symptoms, is necessary in order to do a retrospective assessment and form current psychiatric diagnosis. I demanded to refer me to paragraphs in DSM-4 that prove these statements, but and Dr. Berry admitted that the statements are not supported by DSM-4TR. It proves that Dr. Berry invented these ideas and they contradict DSM-4TR. During the assessment in March 2009, Dr. Berry refused to take into account an expert opinion of Dr. Spanier, a research psychologist, duly qualified expert in the field of psychology and treatment of victims of psychotronic weapons, that my physical and psychological symptoms were the direct result of mind control attacks to my person, and I didn't show any evidence of any psychotic disorder. Dr. Spanier is sure that I am free of indicia that would be consistent with a psychiatric disorder of delusional reference, psychosis, and mood disorder. Psychologically, this mind control attacks causes severe stress reaction that results in symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. During the assessment in March 2009, Dr. Berry refused to take into consideration opinion of Dr. Hall that I may be a victim of satellite surveillance and may have some type of chips in my system. Dr. Berry had no clinical experience or professional training in the assessment or treatment of persons who have been subject to manipulation via directed energy or psychotronic devices, but persuaded me that he was able to examine my mental health and critique reports of doctors Dief and Gratzer. I begged Dr. Berry to be honest and state the truth in his report, that he didn't know how to differentiate psychotronic effects and psychiatric diseases, and wasn't able to make any conclusion and form any diagnosis, but he refused and made the diagnosis delusional disorder. Decision of the College of Psychologists of Ontario. I received the final decision of the college at the end of May 2013. It reads that the panel is of the view that my complaint is frivolous, vexatious, made in bad faith, mood, and abuse of process, and decided to take no further action. It states that it was my fault that I retained Dr. Berry for the assessment, despite the fact that it was Dr. Berry who talked me into this psychological evaluation, and I can prove it. That I didn't want, I didn't need, I didn't ask Dr. Berry for any evaluation. I needed critiques of reports from Doctors Dief and Gratzer. This evaluation was initiative of Dr. Berry. I didn't seek an opinion of Dr. Berry in regard to whether I was suffering from any psychiatric disorder. I didn't want it, and I didn't have money for it. I had to borrow 1,500 Canadian dollars for this examination. Client information form proves that I came to him just for the critique, nothing more. Dr. Berry insisted on this psychological examination that it was outside his area of competence. I didn't know that members of the College of Psychologists of Ontario were strictly prohibited from practicing outside area of their expertise, and Dr. Berry didn't inform me about this rule of the college. Dr. Berry misled me and convinced that he was able to critique reports of Doctors Dief and Gratzer, but eventually I didn't get any critique. I just got the assessment and had to pay $1,500 for it. In my opinion, he was not going to write any critiques. He wanted to examine me for money outside area of his expertise. The college's decision doesn't mention that the panel reviewed reports of Dr. Hildegard Stenninger that prove that I am a victim of specific electromagnetic effects and have nanomaterials in my systems that are used as chips to send signals to my mind and body. The college decision doesn't mention that the panel reviewed affidavits and reports from psychologist Dr. Spanier, psychotherapist Joyce Myers, hypnotherapist and psychologist John Steiner, that prove that I am free of indicia that would be consistent with any psychiatric disorder of delusional reference, and my symptoms appear to be the result of the psychotronic mind control attacks I report. Sorry for speech. Cannot read properly. The college decision doesn't mention that the panel reviewed an affidavit and report of a private investigator, Melinda Kidder, that proves that I am a victim of mind control influence. It means that all these reports were hidden from the panel, and it didn't review them. The college's decision states that my original intention was to use the decision as a critique or evidence in the civil proceeding. It's not true. It wasn't my original intention. It was my question to the college's registrars, and they didn't explain to me that such a use of the college's decision was prohibited by Section 36(3) of the RHPA. The college's decision states that I have an ulterior purpose in pursuing this complaint against Dr. Berry, but does not specify what ulterior purpose they mean. I claim one more time that my purposes are to disclose results of the college's investigation to other psychologists in Ontario and to protect my own safety. I do not have any other purposes, and the above-mentioned purposes are not ulterior. They are not secret. They are well known for the college. Sorry. I do not understand why my intention to disclose the decision of the college to other psychologists in Ontario for the legal purpose is contrary to the spirit and intent of the complaints process outlined in the RHPA, and ask to explain it to me. The wrong psychiatric diagnosis made by Dr. Berry prevented my entry into the United States of America on the 4th of September 2012, because officers of the United States Homeland Security forced me to disclose wrong psychiatric diagnoses and use them in order not to admit me to the United States of America. The wrong psychiatric diagnosis is used by RCMP and police as a ruse not to start investigation every time when I report to them about psychotronic mind control attacks upon me. Every time police and RCMP refer me to doctors and have very hot desire to put me in psychiatric hospitals against my will For example, I called 911 on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of June 2013, since I experienced mind control attacks 24 hours, 7 days per week, except time when I slept. I felt bad and needed urgent help. The Toronto police came to my place, wanted to put me in a psychiatric hospital, but failed. Because I said to them that I wasn't violent, I wasn't going to harm myself or other people. That's why they couldn't put me in a psychiatric hospital. And they decided to arrest me because of these 3 calls for immediate help. The college's decision states that I privately contracted Dr. Berry for his services and was in position to control whether and to whom the results were disclosed. Actually, the College of Psychologists of Ontario suggests me not to answer questions of the Toronto Police and RCMP. They provoke me not to answer their questions regarding my psychiatric diagnosis and hide this information from police. It doesn't make sense, since police can easily find this information, because Dr. Berry promised me to disclose my diagnosis and medical records if he thinks it is necessary. Furthermore, it is better to tell the Toronto police truth, since I may be charged with perjury or felony if I do not answer their questions honestly. And the last paragraph, I requested for a review of the Colleges of Psychologists decision. I am sure that my intentions in pursuing this complaint against Dr. Berry are not contrary to the spirit and intent of the complaints process. I am sure that the college understands that the diagnosis made by Dr. Berry threatens my life and safety very much. I am sure that the actual purpose of the College of Psychologists of Ontario is to back up its member, Dr. Richard Berry, and protect him from investigation of his negligence. I hope that the Health Professions Appeal and Review Board will review the decision of the college and ask the college to start the investigation of my complaint. I want to stress one more time that in my opinion, College of Psychologists of Ontario backs up its member, Dr. Richard Berry, protects him from investigation of his negligence, doesn't want me to disclose their decision to other psychologists in order to get their expert opinions regarding work and diagnosis of Dr. Berry. They do not want other psychologists from Ontario to critique Dr. Berry report. And the last, I wanted to show you a curriculum vitae of Dr. Berry, and it took too much time to open it. My computer works so slowly. I am sure that somebody spams my computer very much. That's why it takes a lot of time to open any document. Okay, just take a look. Clinical experience of Dr. Berry, just psychology, sexual abuse, consultantships, teaching experience, committee boards, presentations, and just a moment, memberships, court appointed assessor, he was expert witness. Maybe this shows, this section shows that he was in sex crimes, assessment of sex offenders and perpetrators.
Look, sexual abuse, custody hearing, incest hearing, child sexual assault hearing, child assault hearing, child sexual assault hearing, child sexual assault, incest hearing, child welfare hearing, child sexual assault, child sexual assault, child welfare hearing, child sexual assault, child sexual assault, child sexual assault, child sexual assault. You see, I repeat because he was an expert witness in the Superior Court of Justice, so I don't know, at trials. Child sexual assault in March 1992, in June 1992, child sexual assault in June 1992. You see, just he witnessed in these sexual assault hearings. You see, sexual assault, sexual, and sexual, child welfare, dangerous offender application, sexual assault, sexual interference, sexual assault, gross indecency, sexual assault in December 1994, sexual assault in December, he witnessed twice. In January 1994, sexual assault, dangerous offender hearing, sexual assault, sexual, civil litigation, childhood victimization, sexual assault in August 1995, sexual assault, dangerous offender application, sexual assault in April 1996, sexual assault, child welfare, dangerous offender application, sexual assault, dangerous offender application, sexual assault in March 1997. In April 1997, sexual assault, aggravated assault, sexual assault in September 1997. In October 1997, sexual assault. In January 1998, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, endangering life, transfer hearing, aggravated sexual assault. I'm a little bit tired, just trust me, everything, sexual assault, sexual interference, sexual assault in March 1999. In March 1999, sexual assault, crown worship hearing, sexual assault, ground worship hearing, sexual assault, dangerous offender application, dangerous offender sentencing, civil proceeding, child maltreatment, parenting, sexual assault, sexual interference in April 2004. In February 2005, sexual assault, memory, recover memory. In November 2005, sexual assault. In June 2006, disciplinary hearing, College of Psychologists of Ontario. Yeah, that's why, yes, I understand why College of Psychologists defends Dr. Berry so enthusiastically. Parenting capacity, failure to provide breath sample. Parenting capacity, failure to provide breath sample. Parenting, failure to provide breath sample, and that's it. The last was, yes, sorry, failure to provide breath sample. You see that most of his expertise was work with sex offenders and perpetrators. And despite this fact, despite absence of any expertise in field of assessment and treatment of mind control victims, Dr. Berry talked me into this assessment. I didn't ask for this assessment. I didn't have money for it. I had to borrow $1,500 for this assessment. He talked me into this assessment, and eventually he provided me with his report, and he didn't provide me with any critiques of reports from doctors Dief and Gratzer.